Um, Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Today have Mayor Burnet talking. She's been with us for a year. Arrived last January as a community volunteer ambassador. And as, I don't know if you're gonna include this part in the story, but Acadia is a dark place to be starting in January. And, and so she's seen the whole cycle of the seasons here. And we threw her into the deep end, starting kind of, or taking one project that had started and taking it to another level, and then starting two new projects. And so, which is what she'll be talking about. And so, and just, we're sad, this is her last week, with us. So, but in January, she'll be starting a similar position at Blue Ridge Parkway, down there. So our loss, their gains. And, but yeah, so today will be a chance for Claire to tell us what she's been up to over the past year. I'll hand it over to you, Claire. Thank you.
Thanks, Abe. And I guess I'll say too, like lots of familiar faces in the room and online that helps get a lot of these things done. So I apologize for redundant information for those of you who have been on every step of the way. Let's see. So for those of you who don't know what a community volunteer ambassador is, which maybe is most of you, this is the first time that Acadia has had a CVA. So I just wanted to explain my role here a little bit more. And this is a quote from the job posting when I saw the position listed and decided to apply for it. I think kind of sums up what I've been up to this year, so it's pretty broad. And then I feel like my time this year has been spent kind of defining what engaging and educating the public about research and management in Acadia means and looks like on the ground. So the CVA program is a collaboration between AmeriCorps, Conservation Legacies Individual Placements Program, and the National Park Service. So there are CVAs all across the Park Service. I'm in a cohort of about 45 folks, I believe. And then this past year was the first time that they had a climate cohort of CVAs. So my position is funded through the Inflation Reduction Act. And there's a subset of us that are located in parks that are more impacted by climate change and are working on some climate related projects. So that's kind of a fun new thing this year. And Acadia will be in the climate cohort of the CVA program again next year. Lauren, Kinnear, and Stetson. I'm gonna poke on Lauren here a little bit to talk about Wild Acadia because one unique thing about my position, I guess, as opposed to other CVA positions, is that I've been working more with resource management and with, as in addition to Friends of Acadia and Schoodic Institute, a lot of other CVAs are mostly just working with the volunteer program. So Lauren, I don't know if you want to give a quick, quick and dirty version of what Wild Acadia is and means.
So sometimes it was hard for people to really understand like who Claire was working for. Was it the park or was it Friends of Acadia? And it kind of, I think, speaks to Wild Acadia because it's so partnership based between Friends of Acadia, Acadia National Park, and Schoodic Institute. And Claire does have an FOA email address, which kind of like made it even more confusing. But you know, when she came on board, she's here as a park intern, but really working on Wild Acadia initiatives with me. So, and Abe, of course, you know, but with me being at the park and Claire being at the park, it, you know, it just shows that tight relationship that we have working on Wild Acadia initiatives. So, you know, it's focusing on restoration in the face of climate change and, you know, working to make these places more resilient and adaptable with the changes that we're already seeing and the changes that we expect to see in the future. 3 main locations for Wild Acadia restoration are the summits of Cadillac and Penobscot and Sargent, and then Great Meadow, freshwater wetland, and then Bass Harbor Marsh, saltwater, the salt marsh of Bass Harbor Marsh as well. So just, you know, really quick overview of Wild Acadia, but there are some ideas for how to expand Wild Acadia and get some more community engagement around Wild Acadia too. And it's been really amazing, like what having Claire here has, has been able to do. So taking these ideas to actually to fruition, so having them actually happen, go from just the idea phase to actually getting off the ground and engaging the community and doing a lot more restoration with the help of volunteers and community engagement. So it's been really great to see Wild Acadia grow with the help of Claire since she's been here.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll be talking about 3 projects that I worked on throughout my term, and all of them kind of touch on research and management related to Wild Acadia. Some of them very closely, like with Save Our Summits, and then others a bit more tangentially. And I'm gonna try to keep it casual and pause after I talk about each project if folks have comments or questions. Please keep grabbing treats throughout the next as I'm gonna start with talking about backyard stewards. So this project doesn't exist out in the public yet. And so this year doesn't exist. This year has really been about figuring out what we wanted to do and how, and just getting geared up to hopefully launch it this coming spring. And so when I started here in January, there were some ideas floating around about how to do community engagement around invasive plant management. And I think folks were inspired by Douglas Tallamy's work with Homegrown National Parks, and there's a lot of different initiatives through Audubon organizations that are focused either on invasive plant management or often on planting native species. And so we looked at a lot of those models and then kind of decided that it would make the most sense for us to create our own initiative, kind of inspired by many of them here in Acadia, in close collaboration with Friends of Acadia. And so Backyard Stewards will be an outreach and communications project that encourages residents of MDI and then some surrounding areas as well to remove invasive plants, plant native species in their place if they're interested in doing that, and then importantly sharing their hard work back with Friends of Acadia and the park as well, so that we know what they've been up to, and so that we can also recognize and appreciate their hard work, and there's a little bit of reciprocity there. It's not just us sharing information. And so this year has been spent kind of gathering a lot of the different pieces of this project, and hopefully they'll come together this spring. So we've created some ID and removal guides talking about the 5 key species in the project. So we're focused on 5 shrubs that are really common on the island, both in the park. They're shrubs that Jesse's team is spending a lot of time getting rid of, but they're also, many of them are really common on landscaped gardens and in people's yards as well. Some resources about native plants that we've created. We filmed some educational videos with the Friends of Acadia communications team. So we can see Jesse and Emma here helping to remove a burning bush or 2 very large burning bush shrubs from behind the Kingsley Inn, and replacing it with high bush blueberry. So we can kind of show people what it takes to do this in their backyard if they don't consider themselves a gardener and don't know what these plants look like. And there's been talk about different ways that we can appreciate participants next year. Yard signs is a popular one. That's something that a lot of other programs do as well. And then kind of within this larger idea of backyard stewards, we've been able to explore other ideas about how to engage community members in invasive plant management. And one of those that Jesse's put a lot of time into helping us figure out is what direct outreach to landowners might look like, landowners specifically abutting the park that are likely to have some of these 5 invasive species on their property. And that's all of that communication will hopefully get funneled through Friends of Acadia. And they've been a huge, so I guess I just want to pause and say too, like, yeah, Friends of Acadia has been instrumental in supporting this idea and allowing it to kind of move forward. A lot of this work would be difficult for the park to do, so certainly like on the timeline that my position would allow for. So a little bit more context. I touched on some of these things about backyard stewards and sort of the rationale behind this project. This map is kind of a good illustration of how ecosystems don't stop at park boundaries. And so these are lots that we would potentially reach out to if Friends of Acadia was to send letters out to folks that are abutting the park and likely have one of these 5 species on their land. And so yeah, something that makes Acadia really unique, as everyone here already knows, is that we're interspersed with a lot of private lands, but that also can make management difficult, especially when thinking about invasive plants. And so especially in areas where maybe some glossy buckthorn is like directly going over the park boundary onto private land, that makes the parks management really difficult. And so if we can provide folks with some resources about how to do some of that work themselves, everyone can kind of benefit from that. We also are focused right now on disruptive species that are also common landscape plants. So there's a lot of different invasive plants that the park manages. But backyard stewards will hopefully sort of be this container that over time can grow and evolve to meet the park's resource management needs. So there's been interest. We talked with different local organizations, like how can we work with folks to reduce light pollution on private property or increase wildlife passage. These are all just ideas that years from now could become part of backyard stewards, but we're really just starting with these core 5 plants. Abe wanted me to talk about challenges and surprises. So here are some challenges with trying to kind of develop this idea over the past year. One, I think this is a challenge and also a strength, but working with 3 partner organizations on something like this can be tricky, figuring out who kind of takes ownership of the public aspects of this work. Certainly for folks on the national park side of things, like capacity is limited, and you have to be cognizant of spending your energy and funds within the park bounds. And so trying to kind of support the park, working outside the park, these are all just kind of tricky logistical questions that I think some of them we've sort of figured out over this year, though, which is nice. Another challenge and kind of interesting question is thinking about how we want to communicate about invasive plants. The distinction between invasive and non-native and native can be, those are like very blurry and somewhat arbitrary distinctions at times. And we did ultimately decide that we wanted to use vocabulary of invasive and native plants in the program, but hopefully not in a way that like demonizes any of those plants, and in a way that can also give a little bit more context into why we're using those terms. And then probably the biggest ongoing challenge is thinking about how we can frame stewardship as mutually beneficial. So we had a lot of conversations with Jesse, especially about how to communicate this project not as just an ask, so that asking folks outside the park to benefit the park, but how they could sort of almost collaborate with us in protecting their own land and defending biodiversity in their own property. So helping themselves and their neighbors, and then kind of in turn the park as well. And so this continues to be kind of like an open question of how we communicate this effectively. And I think it'll be interesting to see after the program publicly launches in the spring, like what the feedback is from the community about this and how you all can adjust things over time. So I'm gonna pause here before I talk about a different project. Any questions, comments, thoughts about backyard stewards? Yeah.
So way back in the 1980s, the dark ages, Judy Connery did some outreach with the local nurseries related to purple blue stripes. What's the thinking about local nurseries with this project?
Yeah, there's definitely been thinking about that. One possibility that we've talked about, I think, no, you're fine. We've talked about working with local nurseries and also with like landscaping professionals. So folks that might be able to do some of the removal or the planting and the upkeep work for folks that aren't interested in doing that themselves. And so there's like the possibility of having some kind of like directory of businesses that are interested in providing these services for folks that participate in backyard stewards has been floated. That would all get funneled through Friends of Acadia. That's kind of up in the air just because working with private businesses is always tricky. The park service is involved, as you know. As far as like collaborating directly with nurseries, I don't have like a concrete plan for that, but I think like well, I did visit a bunch of nurseries to make sure that they sold some of the native plants that we're recommending as sort of replacements for some of the 5 like target species that are part of the program. And I think yeah, I'm curious to see how that will pan out though. Yeah, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I could add to that. Yeah, so Charlie, that was in a time where nurseries sold a lot of these
Yeah.
invasive
Mhm.
plants. So luckily, we have state regulations that all the ones that are part of this pilot shouldn't be available for people to purchase anymore.
Yeah. and do-
So a lot of, yeah, what Claire just said was like, we're more, but still want to engage in that
Yeah.
group, right? Absolutely. It's more of like how they can be resources in advocating for native plantings
Mhm.
in sort of these maintained landscapes
Maybe even
that
with
people
this
have,
one,
absolutely.
maybe they're going to give people a discount on.
Mhm.
That's, yeah.
That's all stuff that like,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
we've
a
definitely
possibility.
this year focused on just like as simple as possible for getting something that's public facing come spring. So like, what information do people need just to do this themselves? Or maybe even what information do they need to talk to somebody who could provide these services for them? But certainly over time, I think it'd be great if people had like incentives from different businesses that would allow.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, I mean, Claire said this doesn't exist yet, but it's just, what she meant was like, you've been working on our strategic plan kind of for this, or a management plan, or however you want to frame it in terms of like, how would this roll out? You know, that's what you've been workshopping and I think, right, we've gone back and forth on things. So it's getting to the point where we can pilot this in hopefully a doable sense, just like capacity wise, but that there will be room to grow. And, you know, while it may not be like a published document that's like, here you go, now you do this, that you've done all this legwork and I presume we'll still have access to all the resources and for everything from sort of like who are, you know, sort of, who are the groups that we need to be thinking about for communicating this that might be engaging, to then like how to like, I mean, just even with your expertise and skill sets on helping us to like, how, you know, how might we display this, or like when we're talking about providing a species profile and like what resident or, you know, landowners might want to know, like just that's been great, right? Just to have, here's some examples of what could be used. And so while it may look a little different once it gets implemented, I feel like our collective teams have enough to work with that it seems much more likely that a spring 25 launch would be if, especially compared to if it was just me doing this, it would not.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I mean, this is really just an idea when Claire came on board, and so, you know, there are programs that exist around the country and elsewhere, and so, you know, Claire was kind of tasked with like, what are the best parts of those programs and how can we make it appropriate to implement here on MDI, and so just to think back and think that like maybe we thought that maybe we could launch this at like the plant sale last June, like it's kind of crazy to think about now. It just got to the point where we were like, you know what, maybe we shouldn't launch this and we're just gonna get everything kind of like buttoned up and really be more prepared to launch this in 2025, and that's really where Claire has taken this. So like now there's a website, you know, a rough website, but a website and all these outreach materials and like, you know, I think we as a team like feel more prepared to like launch this as, you know, a more, I don't know, polished product than if we were certainly to do it like last June. And then also to your point, Charlie, just there's so many these different programs have different focuses, you know, like focusing on like planting native species or pollinator gardens or, you know, there's different things like that. We decided that this program should really focus on removing invasive species. That's like the main focus. And then if people want to like replace those invasive species, so that's kind of like the next step, but like the focus is not native plantings, the focus is more like invasive removal. So that makes it a little bit different than other programs that exist elsewhere also.
Thanks, y'all. Yeah, excited to see how this evolves next year. And also if like for any of you all, if you have feedback or ideas, a lot of this is still very dynamic and I think will continue to be over future years. So yeah, huge shout out to Julia and Shannon. I'm working with an intern at the Climate Change Response Program to do some data visualization work on Acadia's invasive plant management. So a lot of people have collaborated on this project so far, and there's, I think, will continue to be space for that. I'm gonna pivot and talk about a much smaller project that happened this fall. So we call this project Backyard Scientists. So in a way, it's sort of like a sister project to Backyard Stewards, but a lot smaller, and a bit of a different focus, more on science than stewardship, as the name sort of suggests. And so this idea also came before my time here. I believe Jesse, you and Chris have been toying with the idea of doing some outside the park.
Wait, not too much before you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's like this vague idea of what would it look like to do some phenology monitoring. So phenology, like the seasonal life cycle of, in this case, plants. Talk to Abe if you want to dig deeper into phenology stuff. Of species that might be good candidates for planting within the park and restoration work. And also thinking about assisted migration, so plants that might not have been here for quite as long or might be from a little bit south of Acadia. And the reason that we're interested in the phenology of these plants is to see if they might hold their leaves on longer into the fall, which would allow them to compete with glossy buckthorn, which we know holds its leaves on very late into the fall. And so, yeah, Backyard Scientists was born. I basically just emailed a bunch of garden clubs and different community organizations to see if they could spread the word. And we had 7 volunteers who took observations throughout about a span of about 10 weeks this fall of their coastal sweet pepperbush plants. So these volunteers already needed to have these plants in their yards. That's why it's a pretty small pool of folks. And we chose coastal sweet pepperbush, Clethra alnifolia, because it's from a little bit south of Acadia, but it's already present on Mount Desert Island. And so we can see how it's doing, if it displays any kind of invasive tendencies, which we don't think it does at the moment. And again, like how it could potentially compete with glossy buckthorn. So some of the rationale why this project made sense for Acadia, we hope, is that these volunteers could observe plants that that we can't within the park, and that's more difficult for the park to observe. So phenology monitoring has been happening in Great Meadow and Bass Harbor Marsh for some time now as part of all of the work happening through Wild Acadia. But Clethra doesn't grow in Great Meadow or in Bass Harbor Marsh. So though there is some Clethra in the wild gardens, if you're interested in peeking at that. So this kind of allowed us to expand the list of species involved in this monitoring work. This also let us test out some hypotheses before actually trying them out on the landscape, which is obviously more resource intensive, just to bring in a bunch of Clethra and see if it works. And we do know now that it probably wouldn't have worked very well at all because, yeah, Chris crunched the numbers and Clethra is one of the first shrubs to drop its leaves in the fall as opposed to one of the last. So that's really important information. It's disappointing in a way because it would have been nice to have for that data to show that Clethra is a great candidate for restoration, but proving that it's not is, I think, equally important. And again, this project, similar to Backyard Stewards, will evolve over time. So we now have this core group of folks that we hope will continue to monitor their Clethra into the spring and next fall, just so that we can build on the tiny data set that we have. But we're also looking at different species that would be good candidates for this project. And we're interested in potentially one day expanding into other states. So places that might have a climate that's more similar to what we know the future climate of Acadia would be like. I know Chris is interested in New Jersey. So what would it look like to have Backyard Scientist volunteers in New Jersey who are friends of Acadia members and are emailing me their weekly observations or entering those into Nature's Notebook. So lots of potential here to grow and hopefully meet some of our scientific needs. More challenges and surprises. This will, I think, continue to be a challenge, but identifying plants that are good candidates for restoration and are already in people's yards is tricky. Now I think we have a good set of folks who are pretty aware of the plants in their yard and are interested in continuing to participate, so that's great. We've also had some volunteers recommend plants that they think would be good candidates for restoration work because they've started to notice that they hold their leaves on longer in the fall, which is exciting too. So yeah, we haven't determined the species list for this spring's version of Backyard Scientist. So that it's sort of an ongoing conversation, and my guess is that that will shift every single season as we have new folks join the program or leave. And then I guess sort of a surprise for me, the way the program was really structured is that, it was mostly virtual, so we had like a welcome meeting at the beginning of the season, and then I would send out a weekly email and folks would just independently upload their observations to Nature's Notebook. But people were really interested in sort of the science aspects of the project and learning more about phenology and climate science and how the park is thinking about climate change. And so I heard from a lot of volunteers that they really appreciated Chris and Jesse talking about the rationale behind the project. I would also share articles every week that touched on elements of phenology or climate change science, and had a lot of positive feedback about that. So it was cool to see people kind of nerding out on some of these really niche subjects. Yeah, any questions about this tiny baby project? I know we have folks online too.
What species did they recommend?
It was, oh my gosh, I forget now.
Bayberry.
Bayberry, yeah. We had a lot of bayberry enthusiasm, so I think that will likely be on the list for this spring. We have at least one volunteer with bayberry. Yeah, if any of y'all, it's like, so another takeaway too, I guess, is we were pretty concerned about people's ability to navigate technology and whether it would feel intimidating for them to use Nature's Notebook or to kind of like perform these scientific observations. And the folks who actually stuck it out, so they were able to kind of get into a rhythm of entering observations every week, did share that it felt very easy for them. So that's hopefully a good sign that it's like a small ask for folks to participate in the future. All right, we're gonna talk about.
And we got good data in year one, like that.
Yeah. Yes. Good
That's really nice of any study.
data. No Clethra and Great Meadow anytime soon, though.
Well,
Like,
Great, but it's important to know. Save us a lot of money from trying.
At least not for the purpose of shading out Fossey Park.
Right,
That's great.
yes.
There's other.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, right? Like, how do we define success of this project? Like 7 volunteers, it was a pretty small project, like you said, Claire, but we got statistically significant results that told us something really important. I think that's a huge success from you know, I don't want to say minimal effort because you put in a lot of effort, Claire, but yeah, compared to the other projects, less effort than the other projects. So.
Yeah, so I feel like this is the cutest project I got to work on.
Yeah.
Continue to feel that way for future CKs. All right, we're gonna talk about Save Our Summits, everyone's favorite, I feel like, or at least the most recognizable thing that I've worked on this year. My favorite, I guess. So yeah, most people know what Save Our Summits is all about, but I guess I'll just give a little context for those who are new to it. So Save Our Summits started in 2023 as a way to get soil to Sargent and Penobscot Mountains and continue the restoration work that started on Cadillac Mountain many years prior. But obviously we don't have a road to get up to Sargent and Penobscot Mountains, and so we needed people to actually physically carry soil in order to make that restoration work possible. And so the goal this year in 2024 was to continue on the program in 2023 with some tweaks. We wanted to get about 4,000 pounds of soil up to the summits this year. And which we met that goal, which is awesome. And we shifted from, there was sort of a hike-a-thon in 2023, so a bigger one-day event that a lot of you all helped out with. And in addition to a lot of service learning groups that hiked up with Nikki and other folks. This year we did regular community hikes on Wednesdays, which was like kind of shifted how the community could engage in the project a little bit, and hopefully made it more accessible. And that model will, we think, continue on into next summer. So there are 21 hikes in total. I was leading about 2 to 3 a week during the middle of summer. 11 of those were community hikes, and then we had 10 service learning groups. So everybody from the Acadia Youth Conservation Corps joined, twice actually, once with the Student Conservation Association. They sent a group up from New York. We had the Jackson Lab Hiking Club joined, so a lot of different groups that came up and wanted to participate. And then So 245 volunteers total, and I think the number is 299 volunteer hikes. So quite a few repeat folks too, which is exciting. And then on average, folks carried, I would say, around 10 pounds of soil. So it took a lot of steps to get all of these up to the summits. A little bit more about outcomes from this year. So I'm not responsible for the new restoration plots, but Emma and Amina and lots of great hands went into creating 35 new restoration plots on Sargent and Penobscot, which is really exciting. Which that's over 55 square meters of restored area. So again, this is just kind of expanding on the plots that were created in 2023. A little bit more soil this year than last year, which was fun. I had a lot of volunteers who initially thought that the entire pile of soil down by the bridge was like our goal, that we needed to get all of the soil up to the summit. So I had a lot of people be like, oh, like you didn't reach your goal this year, that's okay. And I was like, actually we did. So the soil's still there if anyone walks by, it's fine, it's just waiting, hanging out until next spring. But when I think about like the impacts of this project, my hope is that the greatest impact is actually coming from sort of the education side of things. All of the restoration work that's happening is largely due to like human trampling, and that's the impact of trampling on vegetation on our summits. And so my hope is that like having 245 people who now understand some of the ins and outs of how summit restoration works, the impacts of trampling, know about the importance of walking on durable surfaces, that will kind of hopefully like trickle into healthier summits in the future.
I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
So I know sometimes you would like coordinate with the vegetation crew up there to like, but did they just happen to be there with this group, or was
Yeah.
that more coordinated?
Coordinate is a very kind word. What would happen is I would walk by and I would like point at Alex or Amina, and somebody would be like, you give a spiel, and they did a great job. Volunteers really loved hearing from scientists, from folks on the ground, and they could speak to the particular species that they were using and answer some of the nitty-gritty questions about restoration a lot better than I could. But yeah, this is Alex giving a wonderful spiel to a group of hikers. Our challenges and surprises. So Lauren and I talked a lot about sort of the people management, and Diana as well, about the people management side of Save Our Summits. And I think doing this every single Wednesday, kind of there's a lot of fun stories and different personalities that emerge. So I think the youngest person that we had hiking soil, like physically hiking soil, was 6 this year, and we had quite a few littles. All the way up to like, we have, you know, Jim Lenine, who I believe is at least 80. I don't know.
Yeah.
Going out his age. Love Jim. So lots of different folks participating. Also a lot of different paces, which is difficult because this wasn't the hike-a-thon model. We wanted everyone to stay together as a group. And so I would hike at the front and usually have somebody from Schoodic or the park kind of supporting at the back, making sure that everyone was okay. But making sure people know that, you know, this is about them having a positive experience, but it is at the end of the day a volunteer opportunity, and they need to slow down, even if that's not their preference on the trail. And then I think the biggest kind of overarching surprise for the season was how much enthusiasm we had. I remember talking with Diana in the spring about maybe trying out doing this every week, and we had initially talked about doing it every other week because weekly we probably wouldn't have enough people signing up. And I think on average, we capped the hikes at 20 people a hike. On average, we probably had 14, but there were several weeks that we had wait lists. So a lot of more people that wanted to get on to the hikes than actually did. And we had a lot of press coverage. I have at least like 8 volunteers who showed up for more than 3 hikes. So like once they did their first hike, they really just like would come as much as they possibly could. I think I have one volunteer who did 10 hikes, so as many as they actually could. So that was a lot of fun getting to know folks week after week too. This is a quote from Randy, who's a repeat hiker that I think was shared in Maine Public, that this is the most beautiful Stairmaster in the world, which I feel like is like the Yelp review for Save Our Summit. It is a really beautiful Stairmaster. I didn't get sick of it. So more cute moments from Save Our Summits, because there's more cuteness to this project than the others. We had a group of young girls who came and joined, with some cousins and their parents. They were really enthusiastic. They sang songs from Frozen at every single water break. And like they like stood in the stream, so that it was sort of like an amphitheater and everyone could see them. They gave another performance at the summit. And they were actually really interested in like the nitty-gritty of restoration. So they were like, what's in your binder? And wanted to talk about where all the plots are located and why the plots go where. And yeah, my favorite Yelp review, this is better than Six Flags and Disney as they summit. That's like, oof, big stuff. Yeah. We also did a bark ranger hike because I wanted to spend some time with dogs this summer. This wasn't incredibly impactful from a resource management perspective. We only had 4 dogs participate. Only one carried soil, but Parkman we love, he did a great job. But yeah, the goal here was also to kind of do a little bit of education about the importance of having dogs on leash on the summits especially. And Molly Bogner's research was helpful in thinking about how pets off leash on summits can be kind of detrimental. So yeah, and mostly it was just an excuse to hang out with dogs on the trail all day. That's a fun one.
How much did the dog carry?
I think Parkman did like 8 pounds usually, so like 4 on each side, and he trained for it too. Yeah, MJ made sure, yeah. He was prepared. One of my favorite days from this year was when we did sort of a Save Our Summits reunion hike. So we had a lot of folks at the end of the season who just kind of wanted to do more and stay as engaged as possible. And we knew that in October, the actual restoration work was going to take place. So the soil was going to actually be used to create new plots. So I checked in with Chris and Jesse about the possibility of having some volunteers come up and join, mostly just to observe and to learn, not so much to help, though they ended up really inviting us into the process for about half an hour when we were up there. So we didn't hike up soil, but we hiked up some burlap and some like little burlap sandbags. And then when we were up there, we really got to chat about, we got to look at plots from last year and the plots from this year. And they were very excited to pour some soil out of bags onto the ground. So yeah, that was fun for folks to get kind of a behind the scenes peek at stuff. Any questions, thoughts about Save Our Summits before I fully wrap up?
It's wonderful.
There's been like 8 articles about it now.
I know.
That's a lot of information that hasn't.
It's amazing to me, like, that people really loved it, like, it's.
Yeah. Yeah, I still get emails like once a week from people that are like, what's happening next year? How's it going? We miss it. So it was a fun project. Takeaways from all of these projects, I guess, and from being here for a year. I think my number one is that people are really eager to support Acadia, and to do so in new and creative ways. So we have a lot of volunteer programs that have a really dedicated group that have existed for a long time. And so I think you always knew, Diana, that like there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm to support the park, but I was surprised at like kind of the force of that energy and how willing people are to channel it into new projects as we're sort of like figuring things out on the fly. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see that continue on. I think another takeaway is that new initiatives take time. I think Backyard Stewards was a good kind of example of that. But I think I've grown a lot of appreciation for like the care and collaboration that it takes to create something that is hopefully better than having a really quick turnaround and creating projects that would only last during my time here and maybe not into future years. And then lastly, strong partnerships are key. Obviously, Wild Acadia wouldn't exist without the partnership between Friends of Acadia, Schoodic, and the park. And every single one of these projects required resources and expertise from all 3 organizations and will continue to in the future. So that's been a really critical piece of my experience. That's also unique to any other CBA. When I talk to folks at other parks, and I'm like, oh yeah, well, we create a website because Friends of Acadia did that for us, or X, I just talked to Chris Nadeau because we have a climate adaptation scientists, like all of those resources are really incredible and something that I think every park and every CBA experiences. And that's all I've got. Thanks, everybody. More questions if you have even more. And cookies, lots more cookies.
Was there anything that you missed during the year that you wish you had done, or like, you know, after a whole year, is there anything that you didn't get a chance to do professionally or?
I think like seeing what your crew is up to more is that's probably the one, and I am glad I got glimpses of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like getting a behind the scenes to like, there's some more context for especially like backyard stewards and the importance of that work. But I feel like I got a really good sampler of different experiences, and being situated like between FOA and the park helped with that as well.
Got any new ideas for community projects that you?
That don't exist
thought
yet?
of That don't exist now, but based on your years long experience, like, oh, I think the park should do that next.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about completely new projects. I think projects within projects.
Mhm.
And that's like, those conversations have been ongoing like up until last week, really. We were having meetings about like projects within backyard stewards that could exist. I personally think that expanding backyard scientists to New Jersey is like the next step, new frontier.
Great idea, Claire. That sounds awesome.
Thanks, yeah, I mean, I can't, that's not my idea. It's Chris's idea. Yeah, I doubt that there's really the capacity to take on like the project development for something completely new that's also related to these priorities at the moment, I guess. But my hope is that like all of these projects can remain like nimble enough that they can like meet other goals that the park has over time.
And what you wanna talk about, like the super volunteers? Like for
Oh,
Save
yeah,
Summit?
yeah,
I
so
think that's
Save Our
an
Summits will
important
grow, like all of these projects will hopefully evolve over time, and so for Save Our Summits, the weekly model worked really well this year, but I think the goal for next year is to expand to have Saturdays as community hikes. Just to make it more accessible to folks who work, which that was some feedback that we got this year, and then also inviting some of our super volunteers, folks that showed up 4+ times, to join as safety hikers on hikes. And so hopefully that'll sort of reduce the burden on like SCUDIC and park seasonals and FOA seasonals, and allow some volunteers to step into more of a leadership role. So I already have a short list of folks who expressed interest in doing that next year.
Anybody online with questions? What?
Where are you going next, Claire?
I'm going home, so I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, and I'll be the CBA at Blue Ridge Parkway next year.
Is that through a friends group arrangement as well? Or?
No, yeah, it'll be more of a traditional CBA role, so I'll be with the volunteer program there. And there is a Friends of Blue Ridge Parkway, but I think they're not as big as FOA. They don't play as big of a role as FOA does here. Yeah. A different deal.
Well, thank you very much, Claire. This You've done a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in online, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Emma is on. Emma.
It's a two though, right?
Okay.
Oh, that's